Just after sunrise, a morning stroll took a dark turn when a passerby stumbled upon something no one ever wants to see. A young woman lying motionless near the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Chapel Hill. It was a scene that didn't make sense. She wasn't far from home, and there were no signs of what had happened. No noise, no witnesses, just an eerie silence. Who was she? What brought her to this tragic end? As police began piecing together the details, they uncovered a heartbreaking story that would leave two cities in shock. Born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia, Eve Carson was raised in a loving home by her parents, Teresa and Bob Carson, alongside her brother, Andrew. Growing up in Athens, Eve's exceptional character began to shine early on. At Clark Central High School, she stood out not just academically, but socially, earning the title of valedictorian and serving as student body president with an impressive 55% of the student vote. These early achievements were just a glimpse into the remarkable path she was forging. Eve's warmth, intelligence, and leadership only grew stronger when she enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2004. Despite receiving offers from elite institutions like Princeton and Yale, along with generous scholarships, Eve chose to attend a public university, believing in the value of accessible education. She entered UNC under a prestigious scholarship, pursuing a double major in political science and biology, with aspirations of entering the medical field. Beyond her academic pursuits, Eve immersed herself in service and leadership. She led various student organizations, participated in a rigorous 4-year leadership program known as the North Carolina Fellows, and actively engaged with outreach programs like Girls on the Run. Eve dedicated her time to tutoring local school children and serving underprivileged communities abroad through the Moorhead Summer Enrichment Program. Her volunteer efforts took her to Ecuador, Egypt, and Ghana, where she worked in roles ranging from medical assistant to community educator. Eve was more than just a student leader. She was the heart and soul of her community, admired by friends, trusted by peers, and respected by faculty. Her vibrant presence left a lasting impact wherever she went. But in March 2008, everything changed. Eve was last seen at home around 1:30 a.m., having chosen to stay in and study while her housemates went out. Sometime between that quiet moment and the early hours of the morning, she encountered a fate no one could have predicted. By 5 a.m., she was gone. Later that morning, following a tip, authorities located her Toyota Highlander near the intersection of North Street and Hillsborough Street in Chapel Hill. Tragically, her body had already been discovered earlier, about a mile from her home on Hillrest Road. She had been shot and left in a residential neighborhood not far from campus. Investigators were initially baffled. The motive was unclear, and the act appeared random, with no immediate suspects. Law enforcement combed through phone and bank records, hoping for a lead. Eve's abandoned SUV became a critical piece of evidence in the unfolding investigation. Authorities believed Eve Carson was fatally shot multiple times around 5:30 a.m. on that Wednesday morning, with one bullet striking her at close range in the right temple. Hours earlier, around 1:30 a.m., her roommates had last seen her alive. The sequence of events that followed remained unclear for days as investigators worked tirelessly to trace her final movements. In a bid to push the investigation forward, Chapel Hill police announced a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of her killer. Forensic specialists later determined that the last recorded activity on Eve's computer was at 3:37 a.m., which helped investigators refine the window during which she may have been abducted. Just 21 minutes later, at 3:55 a.m., her debit card was used at an ATM located at University Mall in Chapel Hill. The machine recorded multiple transactions, one of which successfully withdrew the daily limit of $700, while 5 additional attempts failed. Fortunately, the ATM surveillance system had captured images of the person using the card. Though grainy, the footage revealed a young male wearing a black hoodie and cap. In one frame, a second figure appeared in the back seat of the vehicle, possibly Eve herself, though the image was too indistinct to confirm. At 4:44 a.m., another withdrawal was attempted, but this time no cameras recorded the incident. Less than half an hour later, Eve was shot and killed. The usage of her debit card didn't stop there. Later that day, at 12:39 p.m., it was used twice at a mini-mart on Moorhead Avenue in Durham. More suspicious transactions followed over the next 2 days, culminating in one final and significant clue. On March 7th at 12:54 a.m., a surveillance camera at the Carolina Food Mart on Alluston Avenue captured a different man attempting to use Eve's card. This individual, clearly not the same person seen at the University Mall ATM, became a second key suspect. The failed transaction and the clear footage marked turning points in the case as police worked to identify both individuals. The communities of Chapel Hill and Athens united in mourning. Eve Carson was laid to rest on March 9, 2008. Her funeral drew hundreds, while back at the University of North Carolina, thousands honored her memory with a moment of silence. Despite having several images of the suspects, the investigation initially moved slowly. Then, on March 12th, 1 week after Eve's murder, authorities received a promising tip. A man matching the image from the Carolina Food Mart surveillance video was identified as 21-year-old Dario James Atwater. Atwater had a troubled history with 2 prior felony convictions and was no stranger to the criminal justice system. He had violated parole and committed additional offenses while under supervision, and had been scheduled to appear in court just 2 days before Eve's murder. His record included charges for assault, robbery, trespassing, and drug possession with intent to distribute. He had even been caught with a firearm while on probation, and due to an administrative error, his court hearing was pushed past the date of Eve's death. In addition to his criminal record and physical resemblance to the suspect in the footage, Atwater's residence on Rosedale Avenue in Durham placed him within proximity to the crime scene. The investigation gained further traction when detectives connected Atwater to Lawrence Levet, a young man who closely resembled the individual in the University Mall ATM footage. Both men were school dropouts from Durham and had attended the same school, making their connection unsurprising but deeply troubling. Together, Atwater and Levet became the prime suspects in a case that shocked 2 communities and left an irreplaceable void in those who knew and admired Eve Carson. On the morning of March 12, 2008, authorities made their move. After days of mounting evidence and public appeals, police arrested 21-year-old Dario in Durham. He was officially charged with the first-degree murder of Eve Carson. That same day, police surrounded a residence associated with Levet. Tactical teams breached doors and windows during the operation, though it remained unclear whether Levet was present at the time. The case was unfolding rapidly, and Chapel Hill's mayor, Kevin Foy, acknowledged the progress but reminded the public of the deep sorrow gripping the town. A beloved student was gone, and the community was still reeling from her loss. Eventually, Levet was located and charged alongside Atwater. Despite being legally a minor, Levet already had a criminal record, including probation for theft and breaking and entering. He, like Atwater, lived in Durham, with clear visual evidence linking them to ATM transactions involving Eve's card. The investigation had reached a critical point. By late March, a grand jury indicted both men on multiple charges: first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, armed robbery, possession of a firearm by a felon, felony larceny, and possession of stolen property. Levet's legal troubles didn't end there. He was also charged in connection with the earlier killing of 29-year-old Abhijit Mahat, a Duke University graduate student from India. On January 18, 2008, Mahat had been abducted from his home, forced to withdraw money from an ATM, and later shot through a pillow upon returning. The similarities to Eve's case were striking, but ultimately, the physical evidence tying Levet to Mahat's murder was insufficient, and he was acquitted. To this day, Abhijit Mahat's murder remains unsolved. Meanwhile, the legal process for Eve Carson's case began in earnest. Prosecutors chose to try Atwater and Levet separately. Atwater, being an adult, faced the death penalty. Leavitt, however, could not be sentenced to death due to his age at the time of the crime. Prosecutors started building a harrowing account of what occurred in the early hours of March 5, 2008, a senseless act rooted in greed and chance. Around 1:30 a.m., Eve had stayed behind to study while her roommates went out. Not long after, on East Rosemary Street, another student sitting in her car noticed two men, Atwater and Leavitt, watching her. Unnerved, she drove off. As she glanced in her rearview mirror, she saw the two walking toward Friendly Lane, the street where Eve lived. Cell phone records later confirmed that Leavitt's device had connected to a tower near that location around that time. Investigators determined the two were prowling for an easy target. Both were out on bond, short on money, and had no knowledge of Eve personally. She was a stranger to them, someone they encountered by chance. What followed was chillingly calculated. Seeing Eve alone at home, the two intruders entered her residence, threatened her at gunpoint, and forced her outside to her own car. It marked the beginning of a tragic sequence that would end in a brutal and senseless murder. Digital records confirmed that Eve Carson's computer was last active at 3:37 a.m. on March 5, 2008. Shortly after, her life took a tragic turn as she was abducted by Diario Atwater and Lawrence Leavitt, who placed her in the back seat of her own SUV and drove to various ATMs in an effort to withdraw cash. Surveillance footage captured them at a machine on Willow Drive, and when a second attempt was made at 4:44 a.m. at Northgate Mall, it was unsuccessful. They had already reached her daily withdrawal limit. The two men then forced Eve to walk with them into a wooded neighborhood at the intersection of Hillrest Circle and Hillrest Road. When Eve realized what was about to happen, she reportedly asked them to join her in prayer. Instead, they opened fire. Eve was shot 4 times with 2 handguns and then fatally struck by a sawed-off shotgun. Her body was discovered just hours later. The motive for the crime was grimly simple: money. Over a 2-day period, a total of $1,400, the maximum allowed, was withdrawn from her account, a small amount that cost a young woman her life. Once arrested, Diario admitted his involvement, confirming that he appeared in the ATM footage and identifying Leavitt as his partner. To avoid a trial, Atwater entered a guilty plea to all federal charges and, during sentencing, issued a direct apology to Eve's parents. On September 23, 2010, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, thereby avoiding the death penalty. Leavitt, however, chose to contest the charges, pleading not guilty to multiple state crimes, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, larceny, and possession of stolen goods. His trial began in December 2011. After 2 weeks of proceedings, a jury found him guilty on all counts, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Complications soon followed. In 2013, the North Carolina Court of Appeals vacated Leavitt's sentence, citing a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that mandatory life sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. At the time of Eve's murder, Leavitt was 17. A new sentencing hearing was ordered, during which Leavitt addressed the court, expressing regret and acknowledging the suffering caused, stating he was not the monster he had been made out to be. Despite his words, the court reaffirmed its original decision, and he was again sentenced to life without parole, a sentence many considered appropriate given the brutality of the crime. Since his incarceration, Leavitt has accumulated multiple disciplinary infractions, suggesting little progress in rehabilitation. Despite his youth at the time of the murder, he has continued to exhibit violent and disruptive behavior behind bars. There were further ripples tied to this case. Months after Diario's arrest, his stepbrother Shelton was fatally shot while leaving a party. Unlike Diario, Shelton was not involved in criminal activity, and his death devastated their family, particularly their mother, who lost both sons in different tragedies within a year. Eve's murder also cast a harsh light on failings within the criminal justice system. At the time of her death, both Leavitt and Atwater were on probation, and had repeatedly violated the terms of their release. Probation officers failed to respond effectively even after discovering that Atwater had breached conditions multiple times in February 2008. An arrest warrant was finally issued for Atwater and he was taken into custody, but he posted a $10,000 bond and was released just days before Eve's murder. His court date had been scheduled for March 3rd, but was delayed due to administrative errors. 2 days later, Eve was dead. Authorities believe the desire to recover his lost bond money was a key motivation for Atwater's involvement in the robbery. It is deeply frustrating that a series of bureaucratic failures allowed two dangerous individuals to remain free, with irreversible consequences. Eve Carson was more than a victim. She was an exceptional young woman whose light touched countless lives. Intelligent, joyful, and driven, she dedicated herself to public service, education, and global outreach. In her honor, the University of North Carolina established the Eve Carson Scholarship, an award designed by students and approved posthumously, reflecting Eve's own vision for helping others achieve their potential. It is granted annually to two juniors who demonstrate the same commitment to service, leadership, and academic excellence. Eve was considering graduate studies in science policy. Her future was bright, but that story was stolen. For all her achievements, it is the character of Eve Carson that continues to resonate. In her final moments, she chose to respond to hatred with compassion, asking her killers to pray. Even in fear, she embodied grace. Though her life was ended for less than $1,500, her impact was and remains immeasurable. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.